Hey Rory, we are here at the Reuters Pharma Europe event 2025, and I think it's a great opportunity to talk a little bit about EU HTA, which is also a topic here. I see that in the agenda that there are some presentations and dialogues on that. I had Kasper with me just before. We talked a little bit about the three buckets which we recommend pharma companies, biotech companies, no matter if they are small, mid-size or big companies, to look into. The readiness, the strategy, and the implementation piece. What do you hear from pharma companies when they hear the word EU HTA? Are they prepared for it?
It's a mixed bag. So yes, we have definitely the larger companies have been focusing on it for a number of years now, looking at their processes, looking at their resourcing, looking at how they're working, and understanding the process. Obviously, over 2024, we had the rules of the process being written in detail, and really the industry has been digesting that and understanding how they need to implement on that. But it's a mixed bag. You've got the big companies who are quite well prepared, smaller companies still often coming to it new, and then mid-sized companies, it's a mixed bag of some that are a bit further down the road than others.
No, thanks for this first interpretation of the situation. That reminds me just a little bit on the question how prepared we are as Cencora for that. I know you're leading the Center of Excellence for this regulation, and how did we prepare for it, and what can we offer?
Yeah, well, we've been looking at it for a number of years now, 2+ years, starting with a task force of like-minded people coming together and understanding the topic in depth, thinking about how we needed to adapt as an organization. And then about a year ago, we put in place the Center of Excellence, of which I'm the leader of, which really the job of that is to bring together all our domain experts that are going to be involved in delivering for our clients, supporting our clients in this area, and obviously concentrating on being on top of the topic, diving into the detail and really understanding the so what so we can advise our clients appropriately.
Yeah, I think when I remember when we are setting up the Center of Excellence, it was important to offer all the services which are needed to go successfully through this process. So on the one side, all this education awareness training, this change management process, but on the other side, also the process management, the strategy development on JSC, Joint Scientific Consultation, but then also managing the PICO simulation and the JCA process as well. So implementing all that. But not only this, but also to do the statistical work behind. And I think that differs a lot with other companies which have only pockets of expertise around there.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and I've worked in market access and HTA sector now for 20+ years. And it's been, I suppose, one of the most exciting things. And I've been here at Cencora for 2 years. And, we have all of the necessary elements and capabilities in-house. And yes, I don't think that's very common across the industry, and it may indeed be unique. And I think it's important to say that we've been doing HTA strategy and implementation for years. It's just been at the country level, whether it be Germany or France or UK, whatever it may be. And now, obviously, this is a new pan-European process, and we're perfectly placed to help companies navigate this new centralized procedure. And yes, we've got all from the strategic PICO planning, where we're thinking about, what evidence is going to come up and what comparators and populations are going to need to be addressed as part of the JCA, all the way through to the writing of the submission, doing the complex statistical analysis that's required, and then even following through into the country level, which we'll obviously have country team members across Europe ready then to take the JCA and adapt that into the country procedures, whatever that may look like.
Great. Thanks a lot for the summary of all that. Let's go a little bit into the details of the process. When would you recommend a company to start with the preparation? If they have, for example, an oncology product in the pipeline or an ATMP, which is now the regulation for implemented?
Well, what I'm seeing from clients is they're really folding JCA considerations into their earliest planning around how to commercialize a new asset. And probably the first major milestone is designing their pivotal evidence. And the considerations of market access have always been there in designing your pivotal trials. But really, the EU HTA regulation has really accelerated the influence of HTA thinking and indeed European HTA thinking at that juncture. So We're seeing many clients who are doing some PICO landscaping at that early stage and at the midway through their phase 2 trials to allow them to then be ready to design phase 3 trials that will be optimized for the requirements of European HTA and beyond. So that's probably one of the first interventions in terms of then preparing when you get closer to actually needing to do the process itself. Really the preparation time for that we recommend starts 18 months to 2 years before submission to the EMA for your regulatory package. And that sounds quite early, but there's a lot of work to be done, a lot of heavy work in terms of research, writing, analysis, strategic thinking, deepening and broadening your PICO landscaping work. And all of that takes time. And then when you get into the process itself, the very starting gun, if you like, is at the point of putting in your letter of intent, which is the start of the regulatory process, where the manufacturer writes a letter to the EMA and says, here, we are planning to submit in this time frame. And now as they do that, they also notify the HTA bodies within the EU, and that's really the starting gun for the whole process.
Yeah, that's interesting, because I was watching one of the HTA coordination group meetings and webinars, and they were complaining a little bit that manufacturers write this letter of intent to the EMA regulatory body, but forget somehow to inform also the coordination group now. It's a new process, and we know there's a steep learning curve to have, but I think it's important to realize that this letter of intent is really the official starting point for manufacturers' clients to interact with the regulatory, but also with the HTA bodies. Correct?
Absolutely, and to be fair, all the HTA assessors on the European side need to align all their resourcing, be ready to do all this work on their side. So I think they were caught out a little bit. Not all companies went through that important step, because it really notifies the HTA bodies to be ready for this is coming down the pipe. So really important first step. I understand why some of it was missed, because it's all a new process, and this part of it was probably not advertised strongly enough, and something they're really correcting now in all of their communications from the coordinating group to really make sure that companies are taking that first step, and that the whole process becomes a lot more seamless.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. That's one of the learnings, that communication is so important, both ways, from manufacturers to the HTA coordination group, and the other way around, HTA bodies as well, so that everybody is well prepared in this interaction. Now, if we look a little bit into this process, letter of intent, then the regulatory file is submitted. At the same time, the JCA process starts with the PICO scoping process, and then after some time, the feedback to the manufacturer, what are the PICOs which they consider in this JCA assessment. Then the manufacturer preparing the dossier is assessed, and then the report is there. What about the PICO scoping process? How important is that?
Well, the whole challenge of the joint clinical assessment is the time pressure it's under. The fundamentals as a HTA procedure haven't radically changed from mature HTA systems across the world. But the difference here is when it happens and the time pressure that it's under. And the time pressure comes from the line in the sand that's been drawn that a JCA report will be produced 30 days following the EC decision on the marketing authorization. And that's laid down within the regulation. So everything works backwards from that. And so that's the characteristic of the JCA, is this time pressure it's under. And the PICOs is really the framework by which the scope of the assessment is described. And again, the PICO framework is 30 years old, has been used in evidence-based medicine for that long, not necessarily new, but has a new place within this process. And what it means is, because of that time-pressured process, so the process, you're quite right, starts with the EMA application beginning, and the assessors then go and survey all the countries, and they ask all the country bodies, what do you want to see within the scope of this assessment? And they respond in the PICO framework. And that's what generates all these different PICOs that people are concerned about. And then once that's all, and that takes about 100 days, and that's consolidated down and given to the manufacturer, and they're told, this is what we would like to see your dossier answer. And then they have 100 days to write their submission. And anyone in this sector will know that's not enough time. And so what that's meant is manufacturers have had to predict the PICOs ahead of time. So do some legwork in the many months before the submission even starts, the submission process even starts, to try and predict the PICOs so they're ready for any scenario that comes up. And that's where we organizations like ourselves are helping companies well before the process even starts to lay that preparation work down so that they're ready to respond during the live process itself. So yes, PICOs come up, and for oncology manufacturers, many of them are concerned that they're going to have to deal with 15, 20 PICOs in their submissions, and they're really going to have all of those scenarios, that the analysis for that ready to go, so that in their 100 days, they're just responding, finalizing their analysis, adapting to the framework they've been given, and then pushing that through into a high quality submission. And obviously we're there to help them do that.
You're right, Ruairi. And if I hear the same. If I talk to clients, then they are very worried about the many PICOs they could expect, and maybe PICOs which they don't have evidence for. They have nothing to report for. But I know that there have been several pilots done from in the early phase, the UNETA 21 consortium, but also later then. Any conclusions which could give more certainty to manufacturers that they don't have to worry too much about that, or is still a lot of uncertainty to be expected around that?
I think there's a lot of uncertainty. Yes, there's been many different PICO simulations and exercises done, and the coordinating group have recently just released their own one that they've been using as almost like a test case to help them develop their guidance. It's not reflective of the guidance, but it's been a live working exercise that they've had, and they've released the outputs of that. And I think the highest number of PICOs in the oncology indication, and that was 13, I think. And there's been other simulations that, have had much higher than that, which has been causing a lot of concern. I think there's still uncertainty because we haven't gone through the first submissions yet and seeing, well, what comes out the other end? How are these dealt with? What is the scenario when there isn't evidence to answer a specific PICO? How is that dealt with within the report itself? How is that commented on by the assessors? And I think anxiety around PICO multiplicity will reduce once we see the dust settle and we see how assessors actually comment on these things in the final reports. And so I think it'll come down over time, and it's obviously something we're looking at constantly, and we'll be ready for in the early part of 2026 to analyze those first submission reports that come out.
Yeah, I agree. Of course, it needs a little bit learning and then really to see in practice how it works. But I think many clients or manufacturers have the problem that there is no transparency about this process as well. So A, they are not much involved. Second, they don't know what is the individual country HTA body feedback to this PICO scoping process, the PICO survey. And then there is no transparency about the consolidation. So there's maybe many more PICOs in the first discussion, and within a very short time, the author and co-author of the process, two country HTA bodies, will have to consolidate. And then the manufacturer gets the result out of that. I think on the one side, of course, that's then good to prepare and to respond in the JCA dossier to this request. But still, the country-specific PICO request, which is maybe not in the consolidation, is still there from the country at the later stage. So countries are worrying that, okay, there is one piece to answer now, and there's another piece to answer later in the local HTA assessments. Is this right?
It's possible, but again, I think when we see the first submissions come through and see how does that work in practice, the theory of the JCA is that it should be reflective of the needs of the whole EU 27, indeed EU 30 now, with some additional countries added into the scope. And so that, and I think an important difference is maybe the time span of the consideration. You have to say that the European Commission has a long-term view on this, looking 20, 30 years ahead, and looking to bring countries together, so to bring even care pathways together so that you see alignment of best practice over time in both how care is delivered, but also how decisions are made within countries, how evidence is evaluated. So that's quite a long-term project. Whereas manufacturers are more short-termist. Naturally, they have a new product coming through that they want to get into the hands and arms of patients, and also seeing a return on their investment. So their time horizon is different. So we're in this tricky period now where we don't know how the reports will be exactly written, and the influence that they'll have. And we don't know those scenarios where if there's an additional PICO needed at country level, how that's dealt with. It's all possible, and it's always important to remember that the autonomy and independence of the member state decision making is paramount, and the European HTA process regulation comes in as an umbrella process above that, but the independence of the individual countries to make their own decisions for their own citizens remains independent, and that's really important, even if we see a sort of coalescing of approaches and standards of care over time. Each country is still autonomous in that regard.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And it's important that there is a long-term perspective on that, also because now it's only implemented for ATMPs oncology, 28 for rare diseases, and then 2030 for all new products, which will have maybe different requirements how to best do this picoscoping, for example, how to consolidate that, because in mass market diseases, it's more difficult to maybe in some areas to consolidate with that. What I think is also an interesting question to ask is about involvement of KOLs, physician organization, or patient organizations. Do they play a role in this PICO simulation scoping phase?
Yes, so they will be consulted many times through the process. One of the great things about the JCA has been this establishment of a process by which both patient and clinical stakeholders will be involved in this new HTA process, and really they've really pushed the boat out in that, or pushed the innovation in that, in terms of really creating a new best-in-class HTA process that involves those stakeholder views. So yes, they'll be involved, and through the process they can be consulted at individual points, and actually the assessors can reach out to their stakeholder networks at times during the process. One of the things to be aware of, and thinking about rare disease interventions, and one of the things the industry has been concerned about, has been the rules around conflict of interest, and how naturally these rules have been laid down to prevent what it says on the tin, the conflicts of interest, but in rare disease spaces in particular, that can be quite a constraint, where you maybe only have in any country one or two experts in a certain rare disease. They may inevitably be involved in the trials for a new technology, and the industry really wants to make sure that there's pragmatic implementation of those rules, so that the best voices and minds are involved in health technology assessment, and that you don't exclude any key stakeholders unnecessarily. Ultimately, it's about getting great new technologies to the patients who need them, and I think all stakeholders are aligned to that overall objective.
Yeah, no, it's a very interesting phase in which we are now, 2025 until 2030, with all these learnings and with the first products going through this new process. But at the same time, I think we have two processes running in parallel, because for all the other products, not oncology, not ATMP, the old system is still implemented. So the HTA bodies and the countries have to deal with both systems at the same time. So it seems to be heavy lifting for them, and to contribute to a European-led JCA process, and at the same time do the regular work for all the other many products coming into the market, seems to be quite difficult, or?
Yes, I suppose it's short-term pain for long-term gain, and it's definitely an adaptive process. And we've seen many of the HTA bodies in Europe who are hoping to be involved as assessors, scaling up their teams, so going and recruiting more people to be involved, to have the right capabilities in place to be involved in the European assessments. So yes, it's a transitionary period, but the hope is we get to a place where both at the European stage, the JCA, and then at the country level, we see a more efficient ecosystem in bringing the products through to patients who need them. We've seen the first kind of wave of countries announce their own adaptations, and they're broadly in two camps. We see some countries in a kind of de minimis mode, saying we will use the JCA as part of our system, but really there's not much change to how we do our thing. And then you've got other countries, maybe like the Netherlands, who have taken a more progressive view and saying, no, this is a game changer. We're going to change our templates, our process, and really fold this in a much more integrated way. But that's really only the beginning. We'll see more from the individual national level bodies and how they adapt to this new process and legislation in the coming, I'd say, 18 months. We'll learn a lot more about how that's going to happen at the country level.
Yeah, thanks, Ruairi. And I agree. I think we as a consulting company, we have the opportunity to learn from different clients now very quickly, and can share these learnings and these insights as well with many others, and therefore help the entire EU HTA regulation to be implemented more successfully, faster, in a more efficient way. And as you said, to bring innovative medicines as fast as possible to patients across Europe.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we're not quite at the stage of best practice yet. I think we're in the stage of first experiences and sharing those, which will then start to form into best practice. And I think there's a fantastic spirit actually in the industry at the moment of sharing best practice, sharing those first experiences between companies, between consulting. And yeah, it's a privilege of the job that we get to learn all the time from our clients and each other to help make this new process a success.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. It was a pleasure.
Fantastic. Thank you.